Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Duke, and welcome back to The Takeaway. We are together again with Alex Newman. And, the news goes from bad to worse, more and more absurd. And yet, where are the voices of dissent here? Alex, talk about what's happening in Washington, D.C. There seems to be a pattern here, right, Alex? Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Chicago, these big liberal-controlled metro areas are unwilling to even pretend to educate their kids. Your new article talks about Washington, D.C., arguably the most liberal small piece of land in the world. And Washington, D.C., 42%. Only 42% of Washington, D.C. high school kids are prepared to graduate, are able to graduate. Talk a little bit about your story for us.
Well, thank you very much, Duke. And so for those who don't follow education news very closely, last year there was a series of scandals that emerged in Washington, D.C. First, they found out that one of the schools was just handing out diplomas to everybody, even though the kids weren't eligible to graduate. In fact, they were prohibited from graduating because they either didn't ever come to school or they were failing all their classes. And yet the school kept giving them diplomas. This was the Ballou High School. And everybody said, oh, what a great school. Look, all these kids are graduating. What a great graduation rate. And then it all came crashing down when they realized that it was all a fraud. So they started a broader investigation, and they found out that 1 out of 3 students who got a high school diploma last year should not have gotten one. And so now they're coming up with more legit numbers, and we found out that less than half, 42% to be precise, of the high school seniors in Washington, D.C.'s government schools are actually on track to graduate in June this year, in the summer. So the numbers are atrocious. And if you break it down even further, when you look at these 42%, I mean, this is nothing to write home about. These kids will graduate unable to do pretty much anything. And, they can't read properly. Something like 87% of the kids in Washington, D.C. are not proficient in math or in reading. It's a horror story, and it's masquerading as an education system.
This is a real witch's brew. You've got a situation, thanks to the Obama administration, where teachers are told not to discipline kids, particularly minority kids. So they can't discipline them because it'll look bad. So there's no discipline in the classroom. You've got teachers whose curriculum has been hijacked by social justice pedagogy. So teachers aren't really teaching kids math and reading. They don't dare hold kids accountable to grammar, spelling, punctuation, math at a high level. Instead, they're forced to teach kids social worldview. And so now you've got a situation where to graduate, you're social promoting kids. On top of all of that, schools are being rewarded for seeming to graduate kids. It doesn't matter if kids know anything. So if you're a teacher, you're a school administrator, and the money your school gets is predicated on getting kids out of the senior year and off to college, well, why wouldn't you just fake it? There's no standards in the classroom. We're not focusing on real education anyway. We can't discipline kids who don't show up or who don't pay any attention or who disrupt the classroom. And on top of that, if you just send them through uneducated, many colleges are going to pick them up, especially if they're minority kids, and give them all sorts of perks and benefits, free books and that sort of thing to diversify campus. This whole thing is a complete and utter scam now. And places like New York and Washington and LA, it's not surprising that the big Democrat left-wing controlled inner cities are the ones doing these and they're doing it in the name of social justice. I guarantee you, many of the people who run those schools would say this is the best thing for these kids in terms of social justice. Who cares what they do or don't know? The credential is everything.
That's right. And, this is not a new phenomenon. You're absolutely right on so many points there, Duke. Washington, D.C. is the city that has its school system most under federal control because Washington, D.C., is technically federal government territory. And what we see, and this has been going on for a long time now, the state education agency came up with a report a couple of years ago, and I wrote about this. More than 2/3 of the population of Washington, D.C., the overwhelming majority of these are victims of government school, are functionally illiterate. And that's according to the government's own measurements. So, these people are really, really illiterate. They'd be lucky to be able to read a stop sign, much less, a soup can. That's how bad it is in Washington, D.C. And to realize how out of touch these people are with reality, with what America is supposed to be, when they recognized finally that they had a problem, they didn't go to Oklahoma. They didn't go to Switzerland. They didn't go to the homeschoolers to see the Catholic schools to see how to educate children properly. They didn't go back 100 years in time to see how we used to make everybody literate. Instead, they went to visit one of the most brutal mass murdering dictatorships on the planet. They went to go see the Castro regime in Cuba. Literally, the mayor, Muriel Bowser, went down there, the head of the school system, and they said, we need help on our education system, so we're coming to Cuba to ask Castro, a brutal, bloodthirsty, mass-murdering dictator whose educational institutions exist to brainwash the children, how to improve their education system. So, at this point, any parent who puts their kids in these school systems, I got to question what's going through their head. It's worse than irresponsible. It's like a guaranteed recipe for a disaster. And that's why schools like Freedom Project Academy are growing. Parents are waking up to this atrocity that's going on under the guise of government education, and it's getting worse. And parents, wake up.
There's your cautionary tale, Mom and Dad. When the failing schools of Washington, D.C. that can't graduate almost more than half their kids, where perhaps upwards of maybe 75, 80% of kids are functionally illiterate coming out of the schools, at the nation's capital, the epicenter of federal nonsense, their decision is to go to Cuba to find out how best to educate American kids. The good news is that they have not yet gone to North Korea. Maybe that will fix the problem. Maybe Kim Jong-un will welcome them with open arms, feed them some dog meat, and tell them the best way, because that's what the schools have become, primary purposes to socially indoctrinate your kids. That makes sense. If we're not really concerned about high achievement, we're concerned about socialism and norming anti-capitalist values and convincing kids that they're victims and making kids want bigger government. If that's what we want, they made a mistake there. They picked the wrong dictators. Two doddering old men who are basically senile and using their own diapers. Instead of that, go to Kim Jong. Go right to the source of this kind of propaganda. Go to North Korea. You may not get out again, and that would be perhaps the best thing that could happen for us in this country. Alex, thank you so much for your time on The Takeaway today. If you enjoyed that video, please consider following us online and also consider a tax-deductible donation so we can continue to produce quality videos like the one you just watched. I'm Dr. Duke. Thanks for watching.